schedule, because there were reports that there were two battalions of the Republican Guard heading south, and the Americans were worried that that would block their path up to Baghdad, those pictures you've just been seeing. So the Brits were called in, and the army went over to take the initial plunge from Kuwait into Iraq, and we went with them. We were in the first warriors that went up to the breach, which is a bank, and several members from our platoon out with guns and helped the engineers of it, a bridge, a trench on the other side, then enabled streams of Challenger.
Not sure whether that one will be readied or not. Lining up on the runway, preparing for takeoff. Flew in from the United States last week, and they will go on from the United States, from Fairford, on their missions over Iraq. With me in the studio is the former RAF navigator John Nichol, looking at these pictures too. John, just remind us what this machine can do.
The B-52 that we're looking at taxiing out of Fairford now is an incredible war machine. You know, it first came into service in the early 1950s, yet in 2003 we're still seeing these old aircraft operating at the cutting edge of technology, I have to say. Difficult to see with that shot at the moment, but I think we'll see as it turns to line up on the runway what sort of armaments it may have. It can carry cruise missiles inside and cruise missiles, or a mix of guided weapons on the wings. Depending on exactly where they're going to launch cruise missiles from, they could actually be, you could see cruise missiles being carried on that aircraft, hitting Baghdad or the targets, perhaps in as short as time as 5 or 6 hours. Cruise missiles launched from the air can travel in the order of 800 miles. It's actually winding its engines up now, and it's actually going down the runway.
That's a B-52, as you see it, leaving RAF Fairford, heading off for the war in Iraq. And another one coming right up behind it. Yes, there it is.
This is a truly awesome sight. We don't know how many of these B-52s are going to be taking off. The crew inside there, 2 pilots up in the front, a weapons systems officer sitting down below them in a separate compartment, and an electronic warfare officer as well. Crew of 4. It could be carrying in the order of 30 or 40 cruise missiles. Probably a flight time of something in the order of 4 hours before it will stand off weapons. It will be launching the cruise missiles. Cruise missiles are guided weapons that will basically fly themselves to the targets. You know, we could be sitting in the studio, Nick, in 5-6 hours' time, and we could be talking about the weapons that are being carried there at Fairford, and there's the 3rd B-52 lining up for takeoff now. We could be watching those weapons hitting targets in perhaps as short as time as 6 hours. Fairford is an absolutely a massive airbase. I was there last year. It's been recently refurbished. The Americans have been refurbishing over a course of 2 years now, specifically to take the aircraft coming out of the United States. They could fly, in actual fact, all the way from the United States straight to their targets with air-to-air refuelling. But obviously it's better to have a stopping off point halfway through to let the crews prepare, and so that they're not actually flying for such a long time. The sort of missiles, the sort of weapons that they can carry, well, you're looking in actual fact 20, possibly 20 cruise missiles. They can carry something like 51,000 pounds of guided bombs. If you think about some of the Tornadoes and the Harriers that we've been seeing pictures of, they're perhaps carrying maybe 2, 3 or 4 1,000-pound bombs. Well, these B-52s could be carrying 55 of those weapons. They're truly awesome machines.
So just to be clear, John, for those of us who don't quite follow military developments that closely, those planes can fire cruise missiles from a distance away. How many miles?
It depends on the sort and the mark of cruise missiles that they're using. But an air-launched cruise missile it could conceivably have a range, depending on the circumstances, let's say of about 1,000 miles. We just saw a quick a shot there of a United States helicopter coming in to RAF Fairford as well. It'll be interesting to know what that helicopter is actually doing and then what it's actually bringing in. Obviously, huge operations going on around Fairford, though I can't imagine why they'd be having helicopters coming in, unless it's been transiting, unless it's something to do with the security and the activity around the airbase. Obviously, Fairford has been a target of a lot of the protesters' anger. Last week we saw protesters cutting through the fence, getting in, and I can assure you, having been to Fairford last year, the security there is absolutely rigorous. It really, really is enormous.
John Nichol, thank you very much indeed for the moment. So B-52 setting off from Gloucestershire, heading for Iraq, and 4 or 5 hours' time, it is presumed they will be launching their armaments against Baghdad. And we can go now to Baghdad and John.
To give up, but they aren't going to spend a lot of time persuading, particularly if the Iraqi forces show the slightest scintilla of hostility. Jim?
Walter, will anything stop them in terms of, on their own account, wanting to take breaks, wanting to stop to let the troops sleep overnight, or will this just continue on relentlessly?
There are no sleeps. Let me tell you how this is going, Jim. It is, the best word you used is relentless. There was the need a few hours back, or an hour or so back, to have a refueling stop. That was good because it gave these soldiers in the tanks, the Bradley fighting vehicles, and the other armored personnel carriers around, gave them an opportunity to rest. It has been 12 hours, 14 hours, plus they had a full day the previous day, and many of these soldiers are bouncing around inside the tanks. By the way, that tank you're looking at now, the soldiers call the Combat Cadillac. That's the 68, 69-ton M1A1 Abrams. They do sleep on those tanks. I'm told that the prime position to get sleep is just behind the turret there, because that's where the engine of the tank is, and it stays warm. But there's no sleep on this trip to speak of, except in the brief periods when the tanks line up to refuel. There was a somewhat longer delay than expected a while back for the refueling, but there were several reasons for that, not the least of which was that the 3rd Squadron 7th Cavalry had been moving so fast it far outpaced its tankers, which simply cannot drive that quickly to bring the fuel up. By tankers, I mean 5,000 and 2,500 oil tank trucks that bring the fuel up for these vehicles. Right now we are in another pause mode. Again, they survey the horizon and sit and wait, because as flat as you think the desert is, you may only be able to see 2 to 3 kilometers out, and the other side of that ridge, they could be surprised. So when there's a ridge like what we're seeing on any horizon here, what they're seeing is, what they do is wait for the helicopters to go out and reconnoiter. Jim, let me...
Appears to be only a matter of time before shock and awe comes in, as the Pentagon has described it. Officials here have assured us that shock and awe was still on the menu if President Saddam Hussein and his family and fellow leaders in Iraq did not step aside. The President of the United States has vowed to remove them from office. That is currently underway, and it appears that there will be no capitulation in Baghdad. So the next phase of the campaign we're expecting here will be an air campaign as promised, and that's about all that we have from here.
And the first dangerous daylight raid into Iraq. The US helicopter crews had withdrawn. Exactly why, we don't know. They were replaced by RAF Puma and Chinook helicopters. These Marines now desperate to get in and reinforce the coast of southern Iraq. The crash and the casualties has given this attack an extra edge and urgency. We know there are Marines inside Iraq under fire, but these men have been unable to do anything about it until now. Now, after a delay of almost 6 hours, they and we are about to go into Iraq in a massive second wave.
Jim, early this morning, about 4:30 local time, we heard planes flying overhead. Shortly afterwards, there was anti-aircraft fire coming from the direction of Mosul, which is basically right straight ahead of us on this road. This This bridge leads, it's a major road between Erbil and Mosul. Mosul is precisely 47 kilometers from here. Now, my colleague Brent Sadler was on hand later in the morning, and he heard thuds as well. So it would appear that the U.S. air bombing campaign is spreading from the south to the north. And of course, we've all heard the news that American B-52s have taken off from bases in the United Kingdom. The expectation is that they may be heading this way. Jim Payne.
It does suggest what pretty much is going on inside. They still just don't know what the status is. They do believe that Saddam was in the complex when it was hit, and they are willing to believe that he may have been injured. At the very least, he was shaken up by it, but even there, they can't confirm that. And there is still the possibility that he was killed. A possibility, we don't have any information on that either. At the moment, though, there is still a tremendous amount of uncertainty as to exactly what kind of an impact this strike had on the command structure. There are all kinds of different possibilities out there. There have been some changes in Iraqi communications which suggest to U.S. intelligence that something dramatic may be happening. Now, this may be nothing other than Saddam Hussein going underground. What we've seen from Saddam in the past is if an assassination attempt gets close to him, his immediate move is that he will very quickly distance himself from all of his associates. He will put himself in a position where he's safe until he can figure out where the leak came from.
Denying coalition forces have taken control of the southern city of Qasr. U.S. military officials say 2 strategically important airfields in western Iraq have also been captured. Coalition sources say more than 250 prisoners were taken during the operations in southern Iraq. Many of those Iraqi soldiers, they said, surrendered voluntarily. Reports from northern Iraq indicate the coalition's air campaign is moving forward in that area. A series of explosions were reported in the northern city of Mosul early on Friday. On the official front, Britain's defense secretary saying Iraqi troops have so far set fire to 30 of hundreds of oil wells in the south.
And they just formed part of a plan to deceive the international community. Let's suppose that in few days' time they manage to enter Qasr. But how can they enter Baghdad? It will be an inferno if they do.
In the air war, pilots, including those in Britain's Harrier jump jets, are still encountering Iraqi air defences.
It's a fairly surreal sight out there. It's obviously it's dark. We're wearing our night vision goggles, which gives a green cue to the world, and then thrown into there, there's AAA in the air, quite a lot of it just spread around fairly indiscriminately.
It's kind of like what you would imagine a big bottle rocket or a 4th of July firework coming up, except instead of watching it from the ground going up, you're up in the air and you're watching it come up towards you. And you just do the best you can to get out of the way so it doesn't hit you.
At RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, 14 giant B-52 bombers have taken off.
And it's not speed, it's sheer might. Huge convoys of military hardware now inside the Iraqi border, this one heading for Qasr. These pictures present a powerful image, and the British and Americans want them to be seen in Iraq. They're bridge building too, but this is anything but diplomacy as British engineers span the gap and announce their arrival, another strategic milestone. One of the objectives, the securing overnight of the Al Faw Peninsula, began yesterday with a final briefing to Royal Marine Commandos. Some of them would not return.
We are better trained, better equipped, and we have far better morale than the enemy that we are going to be encountering.
As night fell, missile batteries fired from sea and land targeted Iraqi defences ahead of the main assault. The commandos then climbed aboard helicopters for the perilous journey across the border. Their mission to secure oil facilities and the main pipeline to the Gulf and prevent sabotage that might cause an environmental disaster. 20 minutes flying low below radar. Then they were in enemy territory. There was some limited resistance. but soon it was overcome. Then from the darkness came capitulation. Iraqi soldiers, here at least, emerged to surrender. But success was not without cost. During the numerous air transfers, a US CH-46 Sea Knight helicopter was seen crashing to the ground and exploding in the early hours of the morning, 7 miles short of the Iraqi border. It was carrying British and American servicemen. Daylight brought confirmation of the worst.
There were 8 UK servicemen from 3 Commando Brigade and 4 US aircrew on board. None survived the crash. There is no evidence that the helicopter crashed due to enemy fire.
With daylight, more Royal Marines arrived from ships in support of the mission to hold the Al Faw Peninsula. The oil pipeline had been secured. Now it was a question of making sure it stayed secure. The military build-up continued as more numbers of troops were flown in. The mood all the more subdued as word spread, no doubt, about the tragedy, which the Ministry of Defence says was an accident. The troops took up positions on the ground, consolidating the achievements. Soon, more Iraqis opted to let war pass them by.
Turn round. Kneel down. Kneel down.
The images are reminiscent of the 1991 Gulf War, but it's by no means clear yet whether Iraqis are surrendering on any large scale. Just after dawn, US Marines entered Qasr, the largest commercial port where coalition forces say they want to bring humanitarian aid. But they were immediately pinned down in a firefight with Iraqi soldiers and had to call in tank and artillery support. Eventually they raised the Stars and Stripes, only for it to be swiftly removed, deemed inappropriate. In the border town of Safwan, a more friendly reception for the advancing forces. People in the streets shouted, "Saddam, Saddam, your days are numbered." But as coalition troops press on further towards Baghdad, Saddam's loyal forces may put up much stiffer resistance.
Were taking off from Fairford in Gloucestershire earlier on this afternoon. They were the first hint of what the Pentagon now admits is the start of a major bombing campaign. The shock and awe we've been promised before but not seen. Until now, that is, of course, General Richard Myers, the US Chief of Staff, saying recently in the last few minutes that hundreds of targets are going to be hit tonight. Another Pentagon official saying they're throwing in the whole package. That's cruise missiles, the precision J-down bombs, and even that massive 21,000-pound Moab bomb we've heard about. Now, it's worth remembering at this point that the US admits that 7 to 10% of these precision weapons miss, so that civilian deaths are almost inevitable tonight. What it suggests, too, is that up until now the Americans have been holding back, but they're now prepared to take a big risk, perhaps in the hope of bringing this war to a swift end.
There are warnings. And what are the people in Baghdad actually being told to do in advance of these nighttime attacks?
Well, I think people here have a good practice in the fact that they know what war is like. They've had the 8-year-long Iran-Iraq war. They have also had the Gulf War, and there's been bombing since in '93 and '98. So they know how to prepare. They've stocked up. With regard to how they're being prepared tonight, I haven't watched it for a few minutes because what's been going on outside the window has been pretty compelling. But earlier when I was watching Iraqi television, I can tell you there was just a continuous video showing Saddam Hussein pictures, him making speeches, him waving at crowds, him on the back of a horse, marching through the center of Baghdad, and that was accompanied by a song in Arabic in praise of Saddam Hussein. And
a huge pall of smoke and dust marks the border. But the American and British tanks and infantry are already pushing north, and the guns must move fast to catch up. Time for the reconnaissance team to race over the crossing point to prepare the way. Even though there are many British and American soldiers over the border ahead of us, there's still a fair degree of apprehension about crossing it. For a start, any Iraqi commander worth his salt would know that bombing these crossing points would be a surefire way of hitting something. And secondly, after this point, no soldier knows what he is going to experience. The attack helicopters overhead, the constant chemical alerts, and the military radio messages suggest there are pockets of strong resistance. It makes the recce team's arrival in the border town of Safwan nothing less than surreal. "12 hours ago, the might of the American military rolled through here. Only the children seem a little scared."
All night long, firing non-stop, and then all of a sudden it just seems like a normal day with military vehicles just driving around. So it must be quite strange for the civilian population to see all these foreigners driving around in their own country and everyone's happy waving.
And a difficult thing for the soldiers to balance in their minds as well.
Yeah.
Battle one night, local diplomacy the next day. As the gunners prepare to join the queue to get over the border, it's clear they have many very different challenges ahead. Catherine Jones, Southern Iraq, 5 News.
Beginning of the much promised shock and awe campaign. I'm looking out in the city skyline. It's covered by pools of smoke rising hundreds of feet in the air. Right in front of me, it looks like one of the presidential palaces has taken multiple hits. That's burning. There's a huge black column of smoke. It's right across the horizon, 180 degrees. There's another massive series of explosions in the distance, I'd say about 5 miles or so. But it is a devastating fire cloud raining down right across the city. It really is amazing to behold it. I mean, it looks still fairly carefully targeted, but you just see this massive flash, and then about 5, 10, 15 seconds later, you feel the full impact of the percussion of the blast, the building shakes, and then you see the huge column of smoke rising. It's going on far in the horizon, and just on the other side of the city from where I'm talking to you from. I don't know if you heard that. That's just barely, I'd say, about a mile or so away from where I'm talking to you from. It seems to be everywhere. There's traces of fire in the sky as well. The anti-aircraft gunners trying their best, but more in vain, to try and shoot down any incoming missiles and bombs. It seems these explosions are just happening at will right across the Iraqi capital. We're safe, I have to say. We don't really feel that we're in any danger from where we are, and there are a lot of us, but I suppose if you're living anywhere near these sites that are being hit, much more terrifying for ordinary Iraqi civilians. I mean, obviously that's one thing that London and Washington have been at pains to avoid for obvious political reasons. But this is still continuing. I can see another blast, quite a fair while in the distance, but just pools of smoke everywhere, right across the skyline. This is altogether in complete contrast to what happened the last 2 nights. The anti-aircraft guns have fallen silent. It seemed actually, interestingly, that they were nervous, the Iraqi authorities. They perhaps thought that this campaign was going to begin tonight, and the anti-aircraft batteries opened up quite early. But then it was about 15, 20 minutes later, the first huge explosions just slamming into the city.
Marines from 40 Commando head for the war zone. It's the dead of night. Some have just written letters to their loved ones back in the UK to be posted if they don't return home. Today's Scud attacks have stiffened their resolve to cross the border and complete their mission.
The men boarding this helicopter are part of the first wave of Marines to head for southern Iraq. Their mission: to secure an oil installation and 2 platforms, preventing Saddam Hussein's troops from blowing them up.
This is seen as a crucial first stage in the war. The destruction caused by oil fires could slow an advancing army and cause immense ecological damage. We headed to southern Iraq with the second wave of troops, just 2 hours after those on the front line. It was a nerve-wracking flight. On board, we felt vulnerable to anti-aircraft and artillery fire. Flying low, beneath Iraqi radar, made us easy targets for anyone with a decent rifle. The 20-minute journey felt like a lifetime. By the time we touched down, scores of 40 Commando troops were already in the area, and more were to follow. We'd landed right in the middle of the war zone. At this stage, it was still unclear exactly what kind of resistance the Marines might face. Around 1,300 Iraqi soldiers and civilian militia members were thought to be in the area. but reports suggested reinforcements had moved in. Securing the southern tip of Iraq will provide a springboard for the full invasion of the country. The success or failure of these Royal Marines could help determine the course of the war. Clive Myrie, BBC News, on the Al-Faw Peninsula in...
This was the moment the Fusiliers had waited and trained for. The order to attack had come. Rifles got a last check. The decision to go had been dramatically brought forward. Platoon commanders were briefed about the need to move early. Enemy troops were heading south.
What the CO is looking to do is push Y Company and B Squadron across the border, okay, in order to deal with that tank threat.
These 5 men were chosen to secure the high sand bank that marks the border. I travelled with them in their armoured warrior, watching their strained faces as they contemplated the danger ahead. The warrior approached its target at speed, the soldiers scrambling to the top of the 5-metre ridge. Their job to provide covering fire for engineers who had to slice a path through the embankment. As dawn broke, they held their ground. A huge artillery bombardment fired over their heads. After just half an hour of sustained Allied bombardment, which is still going off behind me, there are already reports of white flags being waved. It seems that the Iraqi troops here have had enough. Most of those surrendering were civilians. There was no sign of the Iraqi Republican Guard, but nerves were still fraught. It took engineers just half an hour to bridge the wide trench, paving the way for the first Challenger tanks to roll into Iraq. For the company's commanding officer, mission complete, though Major Paul Nansen was keen to stress just how much further they had to go. It seemed only right that the Desert Rats had opened the doorway to Iraq, the first British land forces to cross the border. Juliet Bremner, ITV News, with the 1st Fusiliers in southern Iraq.
American B-52 bombers with a full payload of missiles and bombs had left their base at RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, bound for Iraq. These huge messengers of destruction would have been in the air over Iraq at the time of tonight's first assault. American warplanes on the carrier USS Lincoln in the Gulf have also been filmed tonight, setting off on more bombing runs. There has now been a second wave of missile attacks on Baghdad. The Pentagon insisting the buildings picked out for this treatment are either military or key government installations, or somewhere Saddam Hussein and those closest to him may be sheltering. It is as yet too early and too dangerous for the independent observers who remain in Baghdad to venture out to check on the accuracy of the bombardment.
Ordinary images of tanks and armor rumbling through the Iraqi desert, and of soldiers advancing at pace. They've apparently met very little resistance from Iraqi soldiers. There are no roads here, only sand. Perhaps that's why Allied forces are calling their path Route Hurricane. Although the ground war began last night, no one could have predicted how fast their advance would be. This morning, British soldiers took the Al-Faw on Iraq's southern tip, and with American soldiers, the strategic commercial port of Qasr. British generals say tonight's key aim is to secure Basra. Parts of that city have already been reportedly taken. To the west, US column charged across the desert. Destination, Baghdad. Some met Iraqi resistance near the town of Nasiriyah on the Euphrates River. Others punched through to secure 2 airfields west of the capital.